Hello and welcome to the Mad Knitting YouTube channel. My name is Susan. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And this is my corner of the internet where I talk about mostly knitting, but occasionally some other things too. This is basically my video journal of things that I am making and the process, my thought process behind it. Occasionally I foray into other crafts, but for today, or most of the time, it's just knitting. You can find me on Instagram as madtown_mama. You can find me on Ravelry, if that is a site you can use, as madtownmama without the underscore. Today is Thursday, January 13, 2022, and this is episode 9. Today I have a couple of finished objects to show you, a couple of works in progress, and just some general thoughts that I wanted to share. So let's start out with my thoughts. I have been thinking about stash and stash goals and just sort of all the chatter and the hype about that tends to flare up around the beginning of the year. Many people make New Year's resolutions, or they vow not to make New Year's resolutions, but they set goals for themselves, or they'll pick a word of the year. Even if we don't do any of those things, the new year tends to be a time when people do some reorganizing, some cleaning out. I did that a little bit at the beginning of this year. It wasn't necessarily my plan. But my husband purchased another piece of exercise equipment, and we had to make sure there was room for that in the basement. We've got this one sort of large unfinished room in the basement where I keep my crafting stuff and where there's some of his exercise stuff. And my stuff takes up more space than his stuff. So I need to share. So I kind of bit the bullet and I thought, okay, I really need to just clean my things out and really be honest with myself about what I think I'm going to use. The truth is, I have a very large stash. It's too big. It's more than I need. I'm not going to share it here with you because that's just, for me, that's a very personal thing. But when I was going through all of it, mostly actually I was going through my fabric stash, but when I was also going through my yarn stash, I was just having all these feelings coming up, and I thought, why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we go through this process? It feels like there's this cycle where it's not too unlike like restrictive dieting, which I'm not an expert in that, so I don't want to like go too far into that, but we have these cycles of like restriction and then overindulgence and then guilt and shame around that overindulgence. And it's not very healthy. It's not very, if you're talking about food, it's not physically healthy to do that to yourself. And when you're talking about stuff like things you're accumulating for a hobby, it's not always very emotionally healthy either. So as I was going through all my stuff, I was thinking about like, why did I overbuy? Like clearly I've been through these periods where I overbought, where I got more than I could use in a reasonable amount of time. And so now I've got this accumulation, most of which I really love. And so it's kind of hard to let go of. So that's an issue. But also like, what was I thinking? So I go through this like phase of kind of berating myself, like, this is ridiculous. What were you thinking, Susan? You're just a glutton. You're just selfish, blah, blah, blah. But then I started thinking a little more carefully about like the times in my life when my stash has grown the most. And it's the times when I was going through some sort of big change, or a lot of emotional growth or turmoil. And I think that acquiring yarn and planning projects and knitting a lot, I've always knit a lot, but have clearly, acquired the supplies for it faster than I can use it up. And I think that it's those times in my life that that I saw the most accumulation. And it was probably because I was trying to like fill some need that I couldn't meet elsewhere, or was feeling lonely because of whatever it was I was going through, and was kind of trying to make up for that through getting all these supplies for making things. And I don't want to get all specific here because that's very personal, but I will say that like things like having a baby, going through a career change, experiencing loss of some sort. I mean, I don't want to say that for me those are like traumas, because I don't think that is for me, but it was, those kinds of things have been like a big deal and a lot to go through. And when knitting is your coping mechanism, sometimes it's easy to like fall over into the collection of supplies for knitting as part of that coping. Which brings me to another sort of adjacent point about stash sort of accumulation and acquisition. And that is that if you live on the internet, particularly social media, then you're probably not immune to all the marketing and the FOMO. FOMO means fear of missing out. That is just like part of the industry, right? I mean, we live in a capitalist society. We have a whole lot of businesses trying to keep afloat, especially during a pandemic. And so, there's a lot of marketing, maybe pushing of products. And, even when I am doing my best to support businesses that I really resonate with, small, local, woman-owned, that kind of thing, I think I've had a tendency to go overboard and justify it by thinking, well, this is the right kind of business and this is a hard time for smaller makers. And, before you know it, then the yarn I have is like spilling out of the storage that I have allotted for it. And it's like just time for me to pause. So I'm not making resolutions. I'm not doing a big de-stash. I do have a pile of fabric that I'm donating. I have somebody locally who is able to take it all and either use it or redistribute it. I've got some yarn that I will figure out where to donate. I'm not looking for suggestions. Just want to be upfront about that. But I just think it's sometimes important to take a step back and think, okay, why am I shopping for this online? Why am I is there a need that I'm trying to fill here? And instead of like being really critical of yourself and down on yourself, just try to sort of step back and be a little more objective and like, okay, let's reconsider, take a pause, and maybe reevaluate. So that's what I'm doing. And I don't have resolutions or a word of the year or any specific goals, except that I would like to end this year with less in my stash than I have right now. That's it. And I think I can meet that goal. I think I can do okay with that. Okay, so let's get on to the actual making. In case you're curious, the sweater I am wearing, I did show it, I think, on episode 2, but it is the Sealback pullover. It is by Thea Coleman. This was a test knit I did for her. I was way late with it. Like, I thought she was going to fire me as a test knitter because I was so overdue with it, but I was like in my first year of a master's degree and dealing with a whole bunch of other stuff in life, and I just didn't get it done in time. But I love it. It's one of my favorite sweaters. It is made out of Barrett Wool Co. Wisconsin worsted. What's it called? Wisconsin spun, something like that. I'll make sure that everything is linked below in regards to that. It's like a sort of oatmeal color, and it's got this beautiful cabled pattern. The front and back look just alike, except for the neckline, and you pick up the sleeves and knit them as a tube down to the wrist. So once you get yourself in the rhythm of the cable pattern, it's actually a pretty straightforward knit, and I really like it. I wear this one a lot. It's very warm, and I finished it over 2 years ago and have worn it a lot and had to wash it a few times, and it's still holding up very nicely. There's not pilling or really obvious wear. So yeah, thumbs up for both the pattern and the yarn. I will link everything below. By the way, I wanted to mention that I try to provide links in the description box below the video to everything that I talk about that I think you might want to look up for yourself. Whenever possible, I provide links to patterns that are available outside of Ravelry. I always include the Ravelry links as well, but I will make sure those are labeled because I know not everybody can use that website. So whenever possible, if there are outside links, I include those as well. Okay, so let's move on to finished objects. I have two things to show you. The first is the mittens for my son. I also finished a pair of mittens for my daughter, and when my kids were leaving for school this morning, I said, can you leave your mittens at home so that I can show them on my video, you know, for YouTube? And they kind of looked at me like, Mom, you're such a nerd. But of course they had backup mittens, and it's not even that cold today, so I figured it was okay. Anyway, these are the Brackthaw Mittens by Faye Kennington. I had her last name incorrect last time, for which I apologize. She also goes by Uki Knits. I love these mittens. My son has been wearing them every day that he needs mittens. The design, I love this tree motif. It was really fun to knit. You do have to pay attention because of course the design changes as you go up. The palm though is pretty straightforward. And just to recap from last time, I used classic Elite Fresco, which it's listed as a sport weight yarn, but it feels a lot lighter than that. I used size 1.5 needles to make a nice firm fabric, and I think it worked out really, really well. The Fresco is a little more than half merino, and it also has some alpaca and angora in it. So it's pretty soft. It's very warm. You can see that there is a fuzz factor. If I hold this really close, I think you can maybe see, especially on the thumbs. I mean, and he's worn these a few times, so they're already, you can already see how it's fuzzy up at the top. But it also means that those fibers are kind of blending together and making the mitten even warmer. So with wear, it just gets better, in my opinion. So yes, I highly recommend this pattern. It's beautifully written. It comes in 3 sizes, and she charts out every size. And it's just, it was very fun to knit. Oh yeah, I forgot to say that when I showed this last time, I mentioned that I was afraid of running out of yarn and that I had done a provisional cast on at the cuff. Like I skipped the ribbing part of the cuff and just did the rest of it. So then I had to unpick that provisional cast on, put the stitches back on the needles, and knit the cuff down. I had plenty of yarn left. When I waited, I could tell that there was going to be plenty, so that wouldn't have even been necessary, but I'm still glad I did it. And then I just did this corrugated ribbing to finish it up. So this took, for the whole pair, it took a little less than 100 grams total when you include both colors. So yeah, that was fun. So as soon as I finished those mittens, my daughter dropped a not so subtle hint that she only had one pair of mittens. And I was like, do you need me to make you another pair of mittens? And she kind of grinned. So I went searching for patterns, and I found this adorable one that has like this owl motif, and she liked it. So I decided to make those for her too. So here we go. I knit these in 48 hours. I started on last Friday night and I finished Sunday evening. This is called Gray Eyed. It's a free pattern by Rebecca Tsai. She used Knit Picks palette for hers. If you look up her other patterns on Ravelry, most of them are paid for, but this one was free. The other patterns she has are these really cool, beautiful color work. She has one with like a panda. She's got one with a polar bear and mountains in the distance. They're just beautiful, beautiful patterns. So one of the coolest things about these mittens is that there is this, well, you see there's like a big owl and a little owl. And that is repeated on, the little owl is on the thumb. And you can see that the palm of the hand has, okay, there we go. The palm of the hand has this leaf motif going up, which continues on the bottom of the thumb. I did not notice until Monday when I had blocked the mittens, like I soaked them thoroughly, lay them out to dry, and on Monday when they were still damp, I went to press them with the iron just to help flatten out the color work, and I didn't notice until then that on the left mitten, I had reversed the thumb charts so that the owl, which was supposed to be on the outside of the thumb, like I did correctly in the right mitten, was on the inside of the thumb of the left mitten. And by then I had woven in the ends. There was no way I was going to redo it, and my daughter didn't mind at all. So it's going to stay. But I'm going to try these on because these actually fit my hands pretty well. So you can see. You can see what they look like. The yarn I used for these is from Pearl Soho. It's Posy, which is a fingering weight yarn. It's superwash merino with a little bit of cashmere and nylon. They say it's fingering weight. I found it to be closer to a sport weight in terms of what it was like to work with. I have made a sweater for myself, the pixie sweater with birds across the top. I made the snow frost hat with it, and this is the yarn that just keeps on giving. I had so much left that I made these mittens, and I still have some left, and I think it's going in my giveaway pile because as much as I love it, I've made 3 projects out of it and I'm kind of ready to be done with it. But it's this deep orange color with the light beige. So that's the yarn I used. What I would like to do though is talk just a little bit about mitten knitting in general and color work, because there are some things I noticed when I was making these versus the mittens for my son, and then a couple of older projects that I brought to show you as well. So these mittens, the yarn I used for these mittens, like I mentioned, has superwash. Most of it is, the content is superwash merino. The cashmere in it, I think, makes them a little warmer than if there wasn't cashmere in it. But the superwash also means that because the fibers have been treated not to felt, they aren't gonna like stick together nicely like with non-superwash. Like you can see that these kind of stick to each other, and like with wear and more washing and use in the snow and everything, it'll felt a little, but it'll also like kind of blur those spaces in between stitches. You're not gonna get that with superwash yarn. I did knit these at a very tight gauge. I used size 1.5 needle, and I got, I didn't measure gauge, but it's probably about 8.5 stitches to the inch. or so. So that really helps. But you can see that these stitches are very distinct, and they will stay that way because the yarn is designed, it's made not to felt or stick to itself as much as non-superwash wool. So I think that's fine, but it also means that these mittens are probably not going to be as warm as something you make with wool that has not been superwash treated. It also means that places where you have long floats, which this pattern certainly did, are more likely to poke through, which was the case at the top of the mitten. You know, part of this might have just been my technique. By the time I got to the top, I was sort of in a hurry, but you can see where it wants to poke through there, where the orange, the camera doesn't like this, where the orange wants to poke through. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're choosing yarn for something like, especially colorwork mittens. I can see why it would be tempting to only want to use superwash, especially for kids' mittens, because you think, oh, you're gonna need to wash them, they're gonna get dirty really fast. But at the same time, they may not be as warm, and it's going to affect how your colorwork looks when you're done. So that's just something to keep in mind. So that's what I wanted to say about colorwork. The other comment I wanted to make was about the thumb design. So in the Brackthaw mittens, you will notice that when I just hold it up so it's basically two-dimensional, the thumb sticks out. That is because the pattern has you knitting a gusset for the thumb. Now you can see your hand, of course, you know, here's my wrist. It gets wider as you get to the thumb, right? So you have to do something to allow for that extra room. And in this case, what you do is, as you are working your way up the mitten, you increase stitches between markers just for the thumb. And when you've got enough, you put those on a holder, and then you go up the rest of the mitten. I personally find the thumb gusset to be a really, really good fit. I just think it follows the shape of the hand really, really well. These are a little big for me, but I like how it follows the shape of the hand. For these mittens, gray-eyed, you don't do that. You just knit up to a certain point and do like an afterthought, or I guess it would be a forethought thumb, which means that you knit across a certain number of stitches on waste yarn, go back and do them again with the pattern yarn, and keep going. And then when you come back, you take out those stitches, so you've got a hole, put them on needles, and then knit the thumb, which is pretty much like a tiny mitten attached to the big mitten. It's really easy, and it's really cute, especially on this pair, but I find that it doesn't fit quite as well. You can see how it's kind of pulling a little tighter here. It's not my preference. I mean, they're comfortable enough, but I can feel how the mitten is a little looser here and just a little tighter right around here, because my hand, I mean, I think I have kind of big hands anyway, but my hand, you know, it's a human hand. It's bigger right here. So this is a common thumb style. It's easy to do. I think it's pretty common in like Norwegian style mittens. So there's not like anything really wrong with it. It's just not necessarily my preference. So I just wanted to put that out there for if you're a newer mitten knitter and you have some questions about style or construction techniques, that is something to look for. I think a gusset is going to fit your hand a little better than this waste yarn type. So when it comes to colorwork mittens, I just had a couple more examples to show you of ones that I made. These are ones that I made last year, just to kind of bring home my point about the fit and also the yarn choice. So what I have here is a pair of mittens called, the pattern is Strago. It is by Jared Flood of Brooklyn Tweed. And I used, you can see how these are also my daughter's mittens. She decided to just go without today. You can see that these are, even though they're only a year old, they are kind of felty already. I used Cascade 220 Sport, which is not superwash. I used the non-superwash version. I used a navy blue and kind of a light gray, and she's obviously worn these in the snow and outside, and you know, they're kind of, I think they may be a little pretty felted on the inside. No, not too bad, not too much, but you can see, this is the inside. You can see the fuzz here, and how those fibers have kind of clung together. And I think these are probably warmer now than when I first made them, because there's just less gap in between the fibers. And again, this has a thumb gusset and it fits really well. These are really fun to make. I could make a lot more with this pattern, I think. Related to that, year I tend to make mittens in January, I guess because it's like our coldest month. So anyway, so y'all may remember that at the presidential inauguration last year, when Joe Biden was inaugurated, there was that photo of Bernie Sanders sitting on the bleachers with his legs crossed and his arms crossed, looking all grouchy, and it went completely viral, and there were Bernie memes everywhere, and it was really funny. But he was wearing these mittens that were actually from some small maker in Vermont who like recycled old sweaters to make into mittens. But once that went viral, there were some designers that like immediately were putting out copycat patterns, you know, because like I said, it's capitalist society, and if you can grab on a popular moment and sell something, or at least increase your profile, they're going to do that. So it was a little bit controversial there for a hot minute, because should we be profiting off of something like that, you know, especially with Bernie Sanders, who's a socialist? I don't know. Anyway, one of the patterns that came out like immediately was called M for A, or Bernie's Mittens. It was by Tommy Schaefer, who was selling the pattern at the time to raise money for gender affirming surgery for a friend of theirs who needed money to help cover medical costs and also lost wages for recovery. So I decided, well, that's a cause I can get behind, and my son thought they were really fun patterns, so I made him a pair. It was only the second pair I made that worked out for him, because the first pair fit me better, but I just thought I would show you. Here they are. I would just use leftover wool. Most of this is local wool. The red might be Valley Yarns, Northampton. In fact, you know what? This cream color is left over from the sweater I'm wearing. That I am pretty sure. I believe the dark brown and the gray is from Blackberry Ridge Mill. And like I said, the red was a scrap left over from something else. But these have the thumb, it looks like they're basically that Selbu style, but I think there were some increases first. So it's kind of a hybrid between the Selbu and the gusset style. But again, I use non-superwash for these. They're not felting as much, but they are very warm because untreated wool is going to trap the heat better than superwash treated wool. But I really like these mittens, and I wear them quite a lot myself, even though they're a little loose. I think they just kind of get looser with wear. But yeah, so I think I mentioned last time that I really hate knitting the thumbs, and that can be true, but sometimes that'll be motivation for me to just like charge on through and get it done so it doesn't sit around for a year, which also happens. It has been a half an hour already, so I better move on. I thought I might have sewing content for you today, but I don't. I think I'll save that for another time. So let's move on to just a couple of things I have in progress. My first work in progress is pretty simple. Not much to say about it. My son hinted that he could really use another pair of socks, and you know, my kids are teenagers, so if they want me to knit something for them, I pretty much drop everything and do that, because take what you can get there, right? Anyway, I asked him what color, and he thought, and he said, well, I have green ones and I have blue ones. How about red? Well, like I mentioned, I have a substantial stash in my crafting area, so I went digging a little bit and found some really beautiful red yarn and started him a pair of socks. This is Knit Picks Hawthorne. They had a sale for Valentine's Day last year where all their red and pink stuff was on sale, was discounted. So I picked this up along with a couple other things. Online sales are another way that stash happens, and I need to just avoid them this year, by the way. That is something I'm going to do. But I'm glad I have this yarn because it's a really nice red, and he seems to like it, and it looks like it's making some nice socks. So I'm not using a pattern. I just cast on 68 stitches with size 1.5 needles. This is a little bit thicker than the sock yarn I'm used to, hence size 1.5. Usually I use size 1s. And I am keeping just a little bit of this rib detail going down the top of the foot. Not across the entire top, but just down the sides. Just to keep it interesting and to help snug it up a little bit. So those are socks for my son. That's what I work on during stuff that I'm doing online where I have to pay attention but need to keep my hands busy so that I can focus. The other thing that I'm working on is a much bigger project. This is one that I mentioned in my plans a couple episodes ago. I started the paper doll sweater. This is a design by Kate Davies. I'll show you a picture in the book first. The book is called 10 Years in the Making, and it's lovely. It includes some new designs and a few of her classic ones, of which paper dolls is one, that have been very, very popular over the last 10 years. So there is a picture of the sweater. It's so charming because it has that paper doll motif across the top. And I had yarn that I bought at the Wisconsin Sheep and Wool Festival specifically for this, and unfortunately I'm having my doubts. But I will explain. So, I did, by the way, like all the knitting experts will tell you like, oh, you should make a big swatch and you should wash it and measure carefully, and I do not always do that. Here is my swatch for the sweater. I didn't wash it, I didn't block it. I started off with size 3 needles, but I could see that the fabric was just too loose and it wasn't on gauge. So I sized down to size 2 needles, and I was right on gauge and I liked the fabric. So I thought, great, I will use size 2 for everything except the color work. I will have to go up a needle size because color work is always tighter and I didn't want it to pull in and pucker. So that was my plan. Now, if you recall, when I was talking about how I was gonna do the sweater, the design calls for you to start with the bottom and knit up, cast on for those sleeves. Hers are very short, it's just like a cap sleeve. Join it all together, do the yoke, and go up. I did not want to construct the sweater that way because length is a little hard to tell for me. I also didn't know if I wanted longer sleeves. So I thought, okay, I'll do a provisional cast on to go all the way around the yoke, start there, follow the instructions to finish up the top, and then I'll pick up stitches to finish the sweater. And at that point I can decide if I want some shaping or if I want longer sleeves. So that's all fine, that's what I did. The provisional cast on was 380 stitches, so that took forever. By the way, when you have that many, it's a good idea. The method I used was to cast on with a contrasting yarn and knit a few rounds before just starting in with the yarn that I'm using for the project. So when you do that, I went back and forth for 3 rows before joining it, and that way I was able to make sure it was not twisted. So here it looks like a ruffle because it's so scrunched up. Here's what I've got. It's really rolling. The purple here is the waste yarn. That's what I cast on. As I suspected, this beautiful mustard color is not standing out very much as a contrast against the pale teal, which is fine. That's how I anticipated it. I really like how this cream color, I believe it's called Antler, contrasts with the teal. But what I am not so happy with is just how it's looking. Like it just looks a little loose, not in that it'll puff out or be a weird fit, but just that the stitches are kind of loose and so well defined that I don't know if I like it. That whole spiel I went on about the superwash versus non-superwash yarn for mittens totally applies here. So the yarn I'm using is from Sun Valley Fibers. It is lovely. This is a local dyer. She's based out of Mount Horeb. It is, let me show you the whole label. It is superwash merino with some tweed in it. And this is the one from Kindred Spirits. That's the main color, that sort of pale teal blue. And it's really, really fine. Very, very fine. Let me show you. Very, very fine. And because it is superwash treated, is it gonna show? Because it is superwash treated, it's not gonna fluff up and fill in like a non-superwash yarn would. In fact, the designer, Kate Davies, uses her own yarn for this. She has this fingering weight tweed yarn that is just gorgeous, and you can see in the photos just how well it fills in for that color work. And I don't know that this is going to do that. For now, I'm gonna keep going though, because I like how the colors look. And I also know that the stitches are gonna look really uneven anyway until it's blocked. So my plan is to finish the yoke. I'm almost done with it. I've had like an online conference and some trainings this week, so I've had loads of time just like sitting on Zoom being talked at. So that's how I got so far in the last few days. So, you know, I've already done a bunch of the decreases heading towards the neck, and I don't have much to go before I'll be done with that. So I will just go ahead and finish the top, bind off, and then block this top part and see how I feel about it. If I don't like it and I need to rip it out, I will use this yarn for something else. I think it would be beautiful in a more simple striped sweater because I really like the gauge I'm getting with size 2 needles. I'm just not sure what I think about how it's working in Colorwork. And part of me is thinking, you know, I should have known better, because I know this about superwash yarn. I don't use it for sweaters for myself very often. because I don't need it to be washable. I'm fine with hand washing. So I'm just kind of keeping going right now to see how I feel about it and see if I still like it after it's blocked. By the way, whenever I block color work, I mentioned this for the sweater I made for my daughter last month. Whenever I block color work, I soak it thoroughly, lay it out carefully to dry in front of a fan, and then before it is done drying, when it's still damp, I will put it on the ironing board, like with a thin cloth, like a napkin or tea towel or something, and press the ever-living crap out of it with a really hot iron. I think it helps to just really steam and flatten out those stitches. I'm not afraid of hurting the yarn. I think it needs it in order to smooth out the mittens that I made. Actually, both of these mittens, because it was a tight gauge, the stitches were kind of sticking out in relief, the dominant color, and flattening it with the iron just really helped smooth everything. So I will do that with this too, and then I will reevaluate and see how I feel about it. Okay, my intention with these episodes are to make them 30 minutes or less. It keeps the time management good for me. Hopefully it makes it fun to watch for you. And I've already exceeded that limit for today. So I'm gonna stop there. I will see you all soon. Have a good week.